So if there's anybody that wasn't able to make it today, it will be available on our website through our Centre for Learning to have a look at. But good morning and welcome to the first Landlord Forum of the year. It's really nice to see all of you here today. So I'm Anthea Chilton and I work for the Housing Ombudsman Service as a Sector Learning and Development Lead. A lot of feedback that we've received from our members is that you'd like to hear more about the good practice that's happening in the sector. And we all know the value of complaints and how, how much learning we can take from them about what's happening with our service provision, what residents are concerned about, what matters to residents, and also what's not going so well. But we recognise that it's also really important that we share what is going well, what's working in service provision, what residents are happy with, what is going well, so we can continue doing more of that. So that's why we put on this Landlord Forum, first one of this year. It's an opportunity to kind of network with each other, to hear about some of the good practice that's happening, and to give you a chance as well to ask questions and find out a bit more. So quite an informal forum, if you like, a chance to just sort of be open and find out what others are doing. So today's session has a focus on damp and mould, and we're really lucky today because this forum's not just being led by one of our member landlords, but we have two. So we have Devon Housing and also 13 Housing Group with us, and they're here to share with us what they've been doing in regards to damp and mould. So the first half of the session is going to be run by Rosie Wills, and Rosie's the technical support and repairs manager at Devon Housing, and Rosie's going to talk to us about the upskilling of teams and tenants and providing training and tools to create those sort of multidisciplinary teams, thinking about meaningful data and looking at where data is best collected and what we do with it, and also has some environmental monitoring case studies for us too. And then for the second half of the session, we'll be led by Bobby Usher, and Bobby is the Customer Experience Manager at 13 Housing Group. And Bobby's going to tell us about 13 and about their journey in regards to sort of the changes that they've made when tackling damp and mould, and looking back to where 13 were a year ago, and how they sort of looked at that sort of where they were from a resident's perspective, and looking at a case study too where there'd been maladministration, what 13 did about that, and the changes that were brought into place, and why, and also we're going to have a look at what's coming next, and the work that 13 still have left to do. So two really interesting sessions coming up this morning, but before I hand over to Rosie and then on to Bobby, just a small bit of housekeeping really, and a bit about how the forum will run. So I've mentioned that we're recording the session today, and we'll make it available through our Centre for Learning, through our website. So anybody that couldn't make it today, or if you'd like to rewatch it, it will be available later on to watch. And I think everybody has already, but if I could just ask everybody to please keep themselves on mute just whilst we're kind of going through the presentations to stop any kind of interruptions, that would be brilliant. What we will do is after each session, so Rosie will go first, and we'll have an opportunity then after the session for you to ask questions. So feel free to pop them in the chat whilst we go, and just if you're anything like me, just so you don't sort of forget them. But there will be a chance at the end and to ask questions, and you're welcome to put your hand up too, and to ask them through the microphone, however you prefer to do it. And then we'll hand over to Bobby, and Bobby will do his presentation, and there'll be an opportunity at the end of the presentation to ask questions there as well. So that's kind of how it will run. I mentioned this is the first landlord of this sort of format that we've run, but we're going to be putting on lots more sessions like this through the Centre for Learning. So we'll have things like, we've already run one of them actually, but severe mal webinars, insight report webinars. We might have some special investigation ones and P49 ones too. So we'd really appreciate your feedback at the end of this. I will give you a link to an evaluation form. It's only sort of 3 or 4 questions, but it's just so that we can continue to kind of improve and find out what you'd like to see more of, so we can keep doing that. So that'll be it there for the end of the presentation, at the end of the session for you. But I think that's it from me for the moment. So thank you very much for coming, and I'll hand over to you, Rosie.
Brilliant, thanks Anthea. So I'm just going to get myself sorted, share my screen, and get someone just to shout out to say when they can see it.
That's looking good, Rosie.
Right, brilliant. So I've got about 20 minutes, 25 minutes to give you a very brief overview of 3 key projects for us in relation to damp, mould and condensation, which from here on out I'll refer to as DMC. I'm going to talk about upskilling teams, meaningful data collection and environmental monitoring projects. There will be, as Anthony said, a Q&A session at the end, but I'll jump straight into it with the introduction. So I'm Rosie Wills and I am the Technical Support and Repairs Manager for Mid Devon Housing, which is part of Mid Devon District Council. My role has evolved into something that I think is perfect for an oversight of damp and mould, and this is because as part of my role, I oversee the repairs and tenancy admin teams, but also manage directly the responsive repairs operatives and get to carry out technical inspections. Alongside our legal team, I also deal with disrepair claims from start to finish, implement some of the complaints lessons learned and deliver the performance reporting. The first 8 years of my career was actually in community-based health and social care management, and I moved into housing repairs just coming up to a decade ago. And I'm now a chartered construction manager and associate member of ASOP RICS. So I know that there's also lots of experts here listening already, and I may tell you a few things that you know already. So I've been thinking about how I can offer something that is a little different. So I'm going to start by explaining the lens through which I've been viewing some of these issues. And a lot of this is influenced by my personal experience that came well before my professional ones. So I've lived in 17 different homes as an adult, and I've had my fair share of damp and mould. But my first experience actually with mould was as a child, maybe 11 or 12, and I was living in a rented home. And it was mould on a ceiling, which started small and it built up into a widespread dark stain. And I must have been bored during the school holiday, so I finally decided to bleach and then paint over it. And the point of this story isn't the property condition, but to highlight that at that time, my experience was that I was living in an environment that was affected by extremely poor money management and debt, which led to a sort of fuel poverty, a very poor mental health and depression, very poor housekeeping, and periods of domestic abuse and minor hoarding. So whilst the mould was technically a symptom of condensation forming on a cold spot, the fact that it was left to grow was actually a symptom of those socioeconomic issues. And obviously there's more to the whole story than just the mould. And this isn't something that I share often. And the reason why I'm telling you about it today in terms of this talk is that I'm hoping it gives some sort of credibility to what I'm going to say. It's not purely academic, it's not just a paper exercise, it's something that I've lived and breathed myself. And that experience gives me empathy, but it also gives me the ability to be objective when I need to be, and to have the courage to make decisions that are sometimes uncomfortable. My personal experiences combined with a career in social enabling tells me that despite how sad or shocking some of what we walk into is, jumping in to do things for people or throwing resources into a situation can sometimes do more harm in the long term than understanding not just the buildings, but the individual circumstances and then working together to find the right solution. So that's me. Let's move on to the team. So upskilling is an across the board change, not just staff and contractors, but also including and appreciating the knowledge and insights that our tenants have. But I'm going to focus on the 2 that I think have had the biggest impact for us recently. The first is our apprentices. There's an opportunity to embed DMC into the apprenticeship and to actively encourage innovation and portfolio work to focus on DMC during the months or years that they have dedicated to learning and development. And what we've found is that people finish their apprenticeships with a specialism and a deep-rooted awareness, just as we've historically had for safeguarding and asbestos. We've also been equipping responsive and cyclical repairs operatives with the knowledge and the tools to identify DMC issues outside of the normal sphere of work, and encouraging issues to be reported, even if it's not the primary purpose of the visit. Our electricians and surveyors are equipped with anemometers so that they can more effectively test extract fans, and the devices also read humidity and temperature. Our trade technicians and multi-skilled operatives carry basic moisture meters, which means that they can test affected areas and tell us either if something is dry, in which case we look at the ventilation or heating, or whether further ventilation may be needed. Mini hygrometers, we've started supplying these within our tenant mould kit, and this moves more towards a proactive approach. It identifies when the mould growth environment becomes present so that tenants can act to avoid mould from occurring in the first place, or to let us know when it's happening so that we can put interventions in place. And it also helps to recognise patterns, and it's helped us to identify issues with heating. And the final benefit is it actually is a way to keep communication open, because there's a visual reminder in the home of some of these issues. In terms of our technical surveyors, we'd strongly recommend and have been using the Protimeter MMS3 as a multifunction meter. This is because not only does it have the resistance and capacitance meter readings, but also infrared surface temperature probe, hygrometer, dew point proximity calculator, a condensation node, which is a really simple to understand red, amber, green colour coding for an active or condensation risk, vapour pressure, and a whole load of other metrics. Because it's got quite a large screen, we can show tenants during the inspections what we're seeing and explain what it means, so that we've got also some sort of transparency during the inspection itself. And on top of this, it's got Bluetooth photo and data storage options, which is brilliant for reporting and record keeping. So I've got a couple of brief examples, but I'm going to focus on this top left, which is an email from an electrician. And previously, he would have attended just to check to see if the fan was working or not, and the job would be completed as yes or no. But now with the anemometer, he's demonstrating exactly how well it is functioning, in this case 72 litres per second, and also that the affected wall is dry. But most importantly, he's highlighted some issues that he's seen with the use of the room. He's noted that the curtains are closed, it's occupied most of the day and night, and the door's shut. So this, combined with a vulnerability flag that we already had on our housing system, it led to a face-to-face inspection, and it identified some issues with self-neglect and hoarding, which prompted safeguarding referral and some much-needed ongoing support for the couple. And incidentally, in this case, the mould wasn't actually a moisture issue at all. So meaningful data collection, this has been a labour of love for me, really. I've invested a lot of my own time in it, but it has been a crucial part of us better understanding our homes and our tenants. So although damp and mould are distinctly different things, our tenants often call about damp as an umbrella term. So this is where our script starts, but then it asks the tenant to describe the visual symptoms, which helps us to split the condensation issues from penetrating or traumatic dampness. The flowchart that you can see, it's not the actual script, but it's a visual indication of roughly what it looks like. Technical scripts themselves aren't a new thing, but I'm aware that not everyone uses a tailored script, and our own has been constantly being adapted over the past 8 years at least, and it's still not perfect, but it is very useful. In terms of data collection, I think this is the perfect starting point. A decent script not only directs the right person to the right job, but it provides the basis for decent data analysis and record keeping. The tenant themselves has great insights and is more than capable of describing in detail. So, for example, mould in a defined area on a ceiling in a bathroom will direct us to send an electrician to check the extractor fan, but also the loft insulation, which we strongly suspect have been disturbed above this area. Whereas a wet patch with no mould only after rain would prompt a roofer to visit, and a wet patch on the ceiling not related to rain would prompt further questions about pipework in the loft and a possible plumbing visit. And if the tenant's not sure, we'd send a roofer with a plumbing skill set. So following on from a smaller project in 2020 to 21, the next phase started with pulling property data from the asset management database. And this, what you can see on the screen, it's a condensed version. But for example, we pulled the building archetype, heating distribution, EPC rating, cavity fill details, construction type and construction year for all properties in our stock. And then to this, we added details from the repairs history between 2015 and 2023 using keywords. To this, we added data from inspections, voids, independent surveys, new reports as they came in, our online DMC surveys, and then also some targeted and random DMC surveys by phone. So by itself, this doesn't mean a lot. It's just a load of raw data. It's thousands of pieces of information, but it's when you dive into it and analyse it that it actually becomes really interesting and useful. So this is a very small sample of some of the things that we found. And how we used it. So from that data, we were able to calculate the risk for each feature, or to calculate the success rates for each intervention. And a lot of this will be no surprise to seasoned surveyors, but it quantified our anecdotal evidence. We can use the information to inform programmes and budgets, and also use it to inform HHSRS calculations that are tailored to our stock. One of the interesting stats I thought was on mould treatment, which was we generally only carry out when there's a building defect, but there's more on this in detail in our 2022 damp and mould review. The other key benefit of the data for us was being able to find and track our progress in finding our silence. This was by creating, and also to help us create focused tenant contacts. So using the information, what we could do in the first instance was to focus the contact on the highest risk properties. So in our case, we would be looking at typically 1950s to 60s bungalows were some of the highest risk properties, and then on top of that, those with electric heating. So at the moment, we're not focusing on reducing the number of homes with DMC that we know about, and in fact, at the moment, we're aiming for this to increase as our target. But what we're focusing on is reducing our silence, and they tend to, at the moment, go in an opposite direction. So we've used the data to try and find a tangible measure for this, and it's by no means an exact science. But what we've done is created a formula of sorts, which is generally based on the worst case scenarios. So that's the bit on the right hand side. So part of the data projects is we had an idea of the percentage of our properties that were affected by any type of damp and mould over a 2-year period. And when I say worst case, this is including even mould in outhouses, just because there's a reference to it. So for that period, it was 14% of our stock had an issue within a 2-year period. Take from that the percentage of properties that we know now have damp and mould, and then subtract from that the current intervention success rate percentage. And that then equals our silence, which is the percentage of households which have damp and mould now, but probably haven't reported it or haven't re-reported it since the last visit. So at the moment, through this targeted project, we've been able to get it down from May last year to where it's around about 300, just over 300, currently down to about 85. And then we're carrying on working it down, and it will go up and down as things change, but it's given us something to work towards. So the final section is on our environmental monitoring case studies, and it kind of brings in together a lot of the stuff we've talked about already. These are real properties with names change and photos of similar properties. They focus on the same building archetype, which is the 1950s, 60s bungalow. So the majority, perhaps 70% of our DMC cases are resolved by increasing ventilation, 10% or so by structural works, and 20% become long-term issues because of complications relating to either overcrowding, hoarding, poor mental health, or other unknown imbalances. And this is where the environmental monitoring comes into its own. And these case studies are some of our more complex, so these aren't going to be about we did this and we magically fixed it. I'll also add that we don't have a massive monitoring programme. Some people I speak to are anxious about the risk of installing lots of monitors but not having the resources to deal with the data. My view is that as long as you've got a resident app, this is somewhat mitigated, but I don't think you need a lot. If you go back to the data collection modelling, what you can do is apply to some extent what you find across other properties. We currently only monitor around 0.6% of our homes, and what we've learned so far from that has definitely made it worthwhile. So our first case study is Mrs. Smith, and she experienced damp and mould in her home over a number of years with a number of remedial works carried out. When I visited her, it was clear that there was a small area of relatively new penetrating dampness in one corner of one bedroom. But I also felt very strongly that there were indications of severe condensation and cool internal temperatures. But Mrs. Smith's view was that all internal issues were related to structural defects, and the only reason that the temperatures were cool was that the humidity would rise when the heating was on. So kind of wasn't interested in having any further discussions about what we could do alongside the works. So I arranged for an independent survey, and we carried out all of the recommended remedial works and also some ventilation improvements. So following the works, which found a defective rainwater gully to be the primary issue in the bedroom, there was no noticeable improvement in the condensation risk, and it became apparent that the heating was still not being effectively used, being generally well below the recommended minimum of 18 degrees. Further discussions with Mrs. Smith found that the reason that the heating wasn't being used was actually an affordability issue, that this had always been the case. And it's a likely explanation for these issues not having been present during the previous tenancy, only becoming apparent during Mrs. Smith's first winter period and generally reappearing every winter thereafter. So we signposted to financial support, but I could tell that Mrs. Smith wasn't convinced. And an opportunity presented itself shortly after this, with a void property coming up in the same street, and I used this as a control property of sorts. While the property was empty, the heating was being renewed and the DMC risk was very high, despite there clearly being little moisture being produced day to day. But when the new tenant moved in, they put the heating up to reasonable levels and the DMC risk dropped from close to 100 down to close to 0. And I was able to share this with Mrs. Smith and tried to encourage her to trial it, even for a week, just to test the benefit. And we haven't been able to achieve this yet, but as a result of the ventilation improvements, at least, we were able to drop her DMC risk from high down to medium. And my main reflection on this is that Mrs. Smith and the control property tenant are actually on a similar fixed income. One can afford the heating and the other can't. But in any case, both homes have the benefit of gas central heating. And if affordability is an issue here, we know that the scale of the problem in electrically heated properties will be huge. So case study 2 is Mrs. Lopez, and it's an interesting one for me because it's the second time that she appeared in a case study for me, and I didn't realise at first, but actually I did a case study a few years ago where I'd asked one of our surveyors to let me know about properties that he'd been to regularly and where it followed people from property to property but didn't affect other tenants in the same home. And this was mould issues, very similar presentation to the first case study. So the only difference really was that the heating levels appeared to be actually absolutely fine. And what we did was carried out some damp proofing improvement works in the absence of any obvious environmental issue. But like with the first case study, we didn't see any improvement after any of those works were done. It didn't resolve the issues, probably because the symptoms were more likely extreme condensation. However, a fortunate combination of the monitoring that we had put in place and also regular communication with the tenant identified that Mrs. Lopez was flying abroad once or twice a year in the winter for 2 to 4 weeks at a time, but leaving the heating off completely with no setback. And this was leading to the home dropping to as little as 8 degrees, despite there being a programmable thermostat available. So a simple bit of guidance will hopefully resolve this, and it probably explains years and years of issues and probably dozens of inspections, not just in this home, but also in the last home, as the home never really gets a chance to recover from the massive rise in humidity and cooling of the walls and floor. The third case study, Maple Road, it was slightly different because we'd learned a lot more by this point. We were very confident that it was a severe condensation issue because even the partition walls had absorbed enough moisture to give a borderline reference reading. The tenants were convinced, understandably, that there was water coming through the floor slab, rising up the furniture, and you can see this presentation in the photo in the middle, where the mould appears to be rising up from the bottom of this furniture. However, floor hygrometer, calcium carbide and salt analysis testing confirmed that this was not the case, and there was no moisture coming up from the floor. Hygrothermal readings showed high levels of condensation associated mainly with high occupation and slightly lower heating levels, even after quite a lot of ventilation improvements were carried out. So I was monitoring this on a daily basis, and I noticed a sudden drop in humidity alongside an increase in temperature in just one room. And the monitoring itself doesn't tell us exactly why this has happened. A change in temperature could relate to a window being closed, heating being turned on, or additional occupancy. But a phone call with the tenant confirmed that the heating in that room had been increased. So I was able to advise about the positive impact, suggested to increase the heating just a little, a couple of degrees, and also signposted to financial support. But the heating levels stayed the same up until the end of the tenancy. I carried on monitoring it over the next couple of months because I was aware of a significant event coming up. And there it was. So I've noticed a sudden and sustained drop in humidity, which completely matched an increase of a few degrees in temperature. And I checked the system and I could see that the event exactly matched with the date of a mutual exchange or home swap. And I finally managed to get through to the new tenant in March, and they confirmed they had no issues at all. And you can see just how this, the damp mould and condensation risk rating drops down from, it was always hovering around the 80 out of 100 mark, right down to nearly 0. So they confirmed they had no visual issues in the home, no mould, no condensation. And even though the actual carpets were the same carpets that were there before, there's no issues with any moisture being present there. And this is a really important point because it demonstrates that there always was a building with no defects. The mechanical ventilation was at the maximum amount it could be. And although high occupation was a factor, it does seem that heating was the most significant issue. Our final case study is Anne and Dylan. And this is definitely the more complex of all of them. And it was flagged by a GP who was concerned about the condition of Dylan's room. And I inspected the same week despite some initial access issues. So Anne was very tearful and she described numerous mental and physical health issues that she had, as well as some terrible family circumstances leading to her grandson Dylan moving in with her. She told me about Dylan's autism and how he wouldn't engage with anyone or let people into his room, even her. He wouldn't let anyone in to clean, and there were food and drinks spilled on the floor and left. He'd been stung by a bee as a child, and as a result, he wouldn't open his curtains or blinds. The photos don't do it justice, but my visits to Dylan's room were the worst environment I've been in my life. It was dark, there was awful air quality, 95% relative humidity, carbon dioxide levels, I think peaked at 5,500 parts per million, which is very, very high. And there was this debris just being blown around by a freestanding fan. And it's important to note that the inspection found that there was no building, heating or mechanical ventilation defect. And to demonstrate this, these are two views of the same partition wall. On Anne's side, it's clean and fresh, and on Dylan's, there's a thick mould on all walls and ceilings. The great thing about environmental monitoring, though, was being able to see the impact of the interventions that we were able to make. You can see the humidity and DMC risk dropped when Dylan did allow me in to remove his curtains and blind and put up a fly screen. And then further, when we put a positive input ventilation system directly into the room. And although it's still quite stagnant and the risk remains, the mould hasn't yet returned. Another benefit of the long-term monitoring is that we don't tick things off as complete just because of an isolated success. And moving into the winter months, because of we carried on monitoring it, and we could identify that there was actually a chronic underheating. And this was leading to an increased DMC risk in all other rooms. And I discussed this with Anne, however, she had no concerns and she declined the offer of a programmable thermostat. So it's something that we're continuing to monitor. But I need to be clear that this isn't our normal procedure. We absolutely do not have the resources to treat every damp and mould case like this, every complex one, stepping in with what is essentially social care support provision, treating mould, renewing carpets. This was an exception, partly through necessity, partly through us being able to access some of our disabled adaptations budget to do it, but also as a demonstration of the resources required for case studies just like that. And it shows that all of that work still hasn't actually fixed all the issues. We couldn't have decanted even if we had a duty to. We couldn't force Dylan to clear his room for access, and there were numerous failed access attempts. So my main reflections on this particular case, and this is something that we're seeing a lot and more so, is that despite it being flagged as urgent to us by the GP, when we called them back to request support for the medical needs, it took 2 months and a chase to even get a response. It took 5 safeguarding referrals and 4 months from my initial visit for safeguarding duty to be accepted, and a further 2 months from there for there being the first visit for social support for Dylan, and a month on from there for Anne. And it may be that support is refused at this point, and people are generally allowed to make life choices that we may see as detrimental. And my final point is this, and it is my own view, not that necessarily of Mid Devon Housing, is that absolutely more needs to be done to improve the response to damp and mould in social housing. And as housing providers, we need to better understand the needs of our tenants. But equally, everyone involved in setting and measuring performance must be aware of the reality of building pathology, air quality, financial limitations, the impact of how the home is used, and also the actual risks associated with mould treatment. In simple terms, I believe that there will be times that condensation-related mould will persist in homes, which may be completely out of the control of the landlord, and in many cases we're seeing is actually out of the control of the tenant as well. We should, however, be able to demonstrate that we have done everything that we should reasonably be expected to do, and ideally more, and signpost to the appropriate support. And I hope that once the political pressure is eased, that providers will have the space and time to develop a multi-agency case management approach similar to what we already have for things like hoarding management, which is probably as complex as this. I know my view is a drop in the ocean, and I respect that others may disagree, but while I've got the platform, I thought I'd take the opportunity to be honest and let you know what we're experiencing. So thanks very much for listening, and hopefully we've got a little bit of time still for some any questions that you might have.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Rosie. Thank you. It's really interesting. I really enjoyed all of those, all of the parts to your presentation. I thought it was particularly really interesting to see how that environmental monitoring and actually what you could see from looking at the data, and actually I can see lots of rounds of applause for you there as well, but how you could see from that environmental monitoring actually, you know, exactly, you could pinpoint exactly where the changes had happened and be able to then look and delve deeper in to see kind of what the root cause of that damp or mould was. So I'll hand over to our kind of attendees to see if there are any questions in a moment, but just from me, I do have a few questions for you. What I was wondering is, so when you were at the beginning of your presentation talking about kind of upskilling your teams and the tenants, and I was just wondering kind of how long it took to kind of embed that training within sort of the upskilling and the training of the staff, how long that kind of took to
do you know what, it's I think it's hard to say exactly, because it's a long process, but then it's also quite quick, and we've got the benefit that because we're quite a small landlord, we can implement change quicker, and it's not necessarily a formal thing that we say, right, here's our training on this. It's just a case of bringing operatives on technical inspections and just talking through, this is what we're doing, this is why, and all of the jobs that we were raising that were off the back of those technical inspections, rather than just saying, can you go and relay the installation? It's having the conversation with every operative to say, this is why we're doing this is what happens, and hopefully that helps with the quality of our work anyway, because maybe they won't disturb it in the first place when they're doing their works. And then with the apprenticeship programme, which has probably been the biggest success, it wasn't a formal training thing, it wasn't a formal project, it's just you kind of push people gently in the right direction and they find their own interest in it. And everyone, especially when people are learning, they like having their own projects and they like having something that they're responsible for. And it doesn't really matter how old someone is, if it's their specialist subject, then they have ownership of it and they feel enthusiastic about it, and then they spread it to the team. So we found just having 2 or 3 apprentices that had it as their specialist subject, they then got jobs within the team and they spread it out, and it was a much less formal process. And I think if it's organic, it works better than formal training.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you, Rosie. Yeah, it sort of almost embeds that awareness of damp and mould in the culture of the organisation right from the beginning. And like you say, it then encourages staff to have that sort of ownership and take their own interest in it. No, that's really interesting. Thank you. And another question from me is, what's been the biggest challenge of kind of implementing all of these changes? Would you say biggest challenge?
I think this is probably the same for everyone. It is time, resources. All change takes a lot of time, and kind of a lot of us are finding we're probably having to put too much time into it. So I think it's really what we're focusing on now is trying to make best use of technology, because you can find efficiencies with technology. So I think time has definitely been the biggest challenge, but I think it's just keeping motivated is another big challenge, but also something we've had to just keep pushing on with, because there's a lot of pressure, I think, and then there's a lot of worry about you can do 100, you can do 99 things right and you get one wrong, and that's the thing that you kind of beat yourself up about. And you're so worried about it not going well, but you've got to focus on the positives.
Yeah, focus on those positive as well. Yes, thank you. And I think it's one of those things. It's with damp and mould, and you mentioned about that kind of follow up. It's thinking about, you know, it was one of the case studies that you mentioned, having you know, having to come back and look at those patterns, and with damp and mould, not just kind of treating it and leaving it. It's actually checking and making sure that actually, okay, in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, when the weather changes again, you know, has the damp and mould come back? What's going on? Yeah, and it's having that time and, like you say, motivation to keep doing that. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions for Rosie from anyone in the audience? I can see you've got your hand up there. Hi, Adele.
Hi, thanks, Rosie. I really enjoyed that. It was really good.
Thanks.
Couple of things that not stood out, but just a couple of things that I'd like a bit more info from you. Your tenant mould kit. What is that? When, at what point do you offer them out to tenants? How does that work?
Yeah, so shall I tell you where it started? I don't know if anyone else has had the red box. So before there's a big mould treatment firm or mould manufacturer, and they used to provide a tenant mould kit, which was just a box of mould treatment and PPE essentially, and we used to send that out, and it was the end point of a script. And we realised that we'd go around to property inspections after they'd been sent out and the box was still in the hallway, never been used. So we decided that actually, why are we spending 50 quid on something that no one uses? It doesn't actually help them. You know, as a product, it works. So we redesigned it to be the NDH mould kit, which is, it's got a mould treatment in it, but just a basic household brand that people recognise and say, well, I would have bought this myself, so it saved me that 3 quid. It's got our leaflet in it, but it's also got this mini hygrometer and a guide of what that means. So it would say, put it on display, and the ones that we try and get have a smiley face indicator. So it would say you want to keep that smiley face, and that is set that it goes sad face if it goes less than 30% humidity or more than 70% humidity. So then they've got an idea that they come downstairs and go, oh, the little white machine is saying it's sad. So then it's that prompt. And I found in my own home that when I had a little weather station put in and I could see it every day, I didn't think I did anything different, but my humidity did come down. So it must have been that prompt in the back of my head. I didn't open my bedroom window this morning, or I didn't do whatever. So, and what we found is that people then contact us and they'll send us a picture of their hygrometer to say, oh, it's still sad and I've done X, Y, and Z. And it keeps that communication open. And I think those people, we would have previously had some contact, but there wasn't any reason for them to contact us again because they said, well, they've come out, they've done X, Y, and Z. Whereas it's the constant reminder something's not healthy in the home. And yeah, so that's what we found. And then where people have the odd issue in, you know, mould in the back of a wardrobe, we've got an extra bit in the kit where we're putting one of those little mini damp traps just so that people can see this is moisture from the air, and you can see it appearing in this damp trap, so that it starts to get people on the journey of understanding it's not coming from anywhere else other than the air in a lot of cases. Where it gets sent out is we've got, as part of our script, whenever the script identifies that there is condensation as the cause or part of the cause, a mould kit will always be sent out. But most of the time it will go out with an operative, so it's not posted out. They'll take it out to the electrician who will go and check the fan, check the loft. We'll just drop off this mould kit at the same time.
Great, thank you. And the last one from me, your environmental monitoring, how you pull your data from your asset information, and then you add on your repairs information. Is that a system, or is that just somebody that's pulled that together manually?
So I'll start with the simple one. The environmental monitoring, straightforward. It's just the ACO HomeLink system.
So what, sorry?
ACO HomeLink.
Could you put all of that in this chat, Rosie, if you don't mind?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
The data collection, I'd say it's 80% manual, good old Excel. So the majority, the most significant bit of the data came from our asset management database. So it was a fairly simple export from there that brought all the details about the property. And then We then did that 2-year project where we had 2 years worth of repairs history, which made it less manual because you kind of just mix the two together and you can match the unique property reference number that brought the two together. Everything after that is manual, but it didn't really matter so much because we were having to phone people anyway, so we just add to it. Ideally, it would be a system so that then it would integrate with others, but the reality is that you've got to work with what you got. We're local authority, we're not going to get a system, a bespoke system available to us, so it's one of these things we thought we've got to do it. So not ideal, but it does the job.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Adele and Rosie. Darren, I saw you had your hand up there. It's gone down now, so I'm not sure if you still have a question, but I just thought I'd check.
Adele covered it off. I was going to say, is this the ACO? Well, I wasn't. I was going to say, is this a certain smoke alarm manufacturer's equipment? That's what I was going to ask. But while I'm here, just a quick one, Rosie. I apologise, I missed the start, and you might have said it, but you said 0.6% of your properties have this installed now. How many properties do you have?
Oh, just less than 3,000.
Not too dissimilar to us, then.
Yeah. So that's been quite a manageable amount. I think we probably could have more, and the system works quite well to show what's going on at a glance.
I will using you as my example to push this forward ourselves. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Darren. Thank you. Are there any other questions for Rosie before we hand over to Bobby? Craig.
Oh, hi, Rosie. I think like everybody else really enjoyed that. Found it really useful.
Thank you.
I suppose my question is a bit more of the, I say on the practicality side, with the work that the electricians or the trade staff are doing with the monitoring kit, etc. You know, we're looking at a similar way of how we can use our existing staff to get us this, you know, this information, this thread. I just wondered, so what impact time-wise did it have on the rest of the repairs? You know, have you had to increase the team? You know, has it meant that tenants have had to wait longer for other repairs if their electricians are taking longer, for example, on a particular job? I mean, we're looking as well at the treatment side and how we can get in and do that wash or treatment with the trades who's already out there. But obviously we're conscious as well as how that might impact, repairs times.
Yeah. So I think treatment would be slightly different. So as I said, we don't really do a lot of treatment unless it's, you know, caused by a long-standing roof leak or flooding or anything like that. That probably would take a little bit, you know, it would have an impact. The testing, it's been negligible, the extra time that it's taken. They're there, and quite often it's a fairly simple. The example that was there, the checking the extractor fan, it would always be booked for one slot, which is half an hour, and it's completely reasonable to within half an hour check a fan. And if you're going to check it, you might as well just pop an anemometer. It doesn't take 2 seconds, and then pop in a damp meter on. It's just having that snapshot of what happened. And in the long term, we did have, when you've got a technical inspector going out, there's no real reason for a technical inspector to go out to do something that a trade operative is more than competent and capable to do. And then it means your technical inspectors have more time to do the things that they need to be at. And then it saves time for the tenant in the long term, because it's so often that you'd have someone who's a qualified surveyor going out to say that extractor fan's not working, let's get an electrician out. Whereas the electrician could just be the one that goes there in the first place.
Yeah, no, that's a fair comment. No, I just wondered how, what, if any, impact that was. So no, that's great.
Yeah, if nothing else, it saved time, because with the extractor fan example is that they, if they're doing the inspection in the first place, they know then what the follow one's going to be. So they know, and then they would have you avoid those odd ones where they'll say, where the surveyor will look at it and say it needs a new fan, and then the electrician will go and say we can't put in that fan because it's an old low voltage type and we can't get them anymore, so I need to come back again with a different fan, or asbestos trained person. So if nothing else, it saved us time.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that's what we're trying to work at with the team, is just that little bit of, not re-education as such, because they know of these issues. It's letting them see the wider picture of the the bigger picture, I suppose, of how this ultimately helps the tenants as well as, you know, everything. So yeah, it's just a bit of training and bits that we're thinking about. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Craig, and thank you very much again, Rosie, for such an interesting presentation. It was fantastic, and really appreciate all your time and work putting into the presentation. And I will now hand over to Bobby. If Bobby, you would like to take over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Has that come through for everyone?
Yeah,
Brilliant.
that's looking good.
Okay, just a bit of an introduction to myself. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, everybody. And thank you, Anthea, for the opportunity for us to come and present our damp and mould spotlight piece. My name's Bobby Usher. I'm the Customer Experience Manager at 13. And Adele's my line manager, who's just been on the call. My role within 13 is to understand what is happening from a customer's experience and ensure that the customer's getting the best possible experience they can. The teams that I lead are the complaints team, our customer recovery team, which is customer relations, our customer success team, which is all about eliciting feedback from customers, and our customer engagement team, who work with our involved customers and scrutinise the services that we provide to our customers as well. And the team that I'm part of is a wider customer experience team as well. So some of you might be wondering why there's a picture of Liam Gallagher on there. Those eagle-eyed Oasis fans of you in this group, which there might not be many, there we were. Now here we are. It's Oasis lyrics. So basically, if anybody's wondering why it is and they think it's grammatically incorrect, that's the reason why. Just wanted to clear it up for everybody. So what we're going to cover today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about 13, where we were, or there we were. Tell you a little bit about a case study that we had that actually came through from the Housing Ombudsman a little less than a year ago, where we are now, what our plans are moving forward, and then open it up for any questions after that. So I'll start a little bit by telling you about 13. Up in the northeast, we're the largest housing association within the northeast. We have properties covering from primarily the Teesside area, so Middlesbrough, Stockton, Hartlepool, and the surrounding areas, all the way up as far as Northumberland and as far down as Hull and more recently York and Whitby. So we cover quite a wide space of areas. We have over 36,000 properties that we manage and help our customers with. There's over 70,000 customers within those properties as well. We are a not-for-profit organisation, which I just wanted to add in there as well. And in the year 22-23, we were the largest of 5 landlords to receive no maladministrations within the year from the Housing Ombudsman, which is something I know that we're all very proud of here at 13. Unfortunately, as you will see from a case study, that can't be said this year. However, it's given us an opportunity for a lot of reflection and a lot of learning on those things as well. So there we were. Just a year ago, you're going to get to hear it, one of my stories now. There we were, just over a year ago now. Our damp and mould, we had a lot coming through from the back of the case in Rochdale with our Bishak, which is very, very unfortunate and very sad. Our asset team dealt with all damp and mould queries last year, just over a year ago. And that was a team made up of 3 surveyors and 1 manager. They would go out and attend those properties and identify what work needed to be carried out and then go off and request that work. What we did was we looked at that process. We looked at our complaints system. So as part of my role on a monthly basis, I analyse what complaints come through and then present that information into my superiors as well as the board and our customer committee as well. Through that analysis, we were discovering the same thing was happening over and over again. Customers were waiting a long time for work to be carried out, sometimes weeks, sometimes months. And in one particular instance that I can remember of, the customer had waited a few years for actually things to happen. Well, thankfully, that case wasn't a severe case of damp and mould. However, it had the potential to be worse than it ended up being. Through the teams that I work with, we carried out satisfaction surveys with our customers to understand what the impact of that information was on on them, and the level of detail that we needed to go into, and the scale of the issue that we had within our damp and mold responses. We also have something called the customer feedback log. So the customer feedback log is a centralized database used by a lot of the customer facing areas of the business, such as the teams that I work with, our call center team, which is known as our touchpoint team, who have the call center, as well as our stores. All of those touch points for customers, as well as your housing services, your repairs services, they all had access to this form, which meant that any dissatisfied customers, they could log that on this form, and on a monthly basis, or on a weekly basis, actually, in real time, but on a monthly basis, that information is collated and then gathered and shared with everybody within the business. And that was all to do with understanding where dissatisfaction was coming from. Now, over a prolonged period of time, sort of over a few months, it became clear that we had some issues with damp and mould. And obviously, with the increased spotlight on it, given what had happened in Rochdale, it was high on the agenda. Going back to just over a year ago, from now, as I say, it sat with our asset management team at the time. And at that time, we had over 1,000 jobs outstanding, some that we'd never gone to, some that we'd never acted upon, some going as far back as November 2022, which obviously increased the demand on the customers. Customers were unhappy, meaning they were making more complaints, and we were seeing it through the complaint side of things. When the complaints were being investigated, it became rapidly apparent that there was a lack of record keeping within our system in relation to these damp and mould complaints, in relation to what had been done when it had been done. It meant that we were paying out a lot of money for these things because we couldn't evidence to say that we'd done something, even though we may have. So with that complaints analysis, what we did was, what I did rather, I present this information on a monthly basis. I break it down into the top 3 areas of dissatisfaction. And each month what came out was communication, but specifically communication around damp and mould issues was one of the top things that was coming out. As I've mentioned previously, that information was reported into our SLT team and our board, and as well as being discussed by our heads of service on a regular basis as well. So to cut a very long story short, it was a mess. It was all over the place. It was messy. That's why there's a picture of Lionel Messi on there. We also involved our customers group in this as well. So we have a number of different stream leads within 13, as I'm sure you all do in your respective housing associations and private landlords. And one of the things that we asked them to look at was that damp and mould journey, and that journey from an asset point of view. So we went through it, showed them the process, asked them for all of their thoughts and feelings on it. Now, of those groups, there are 5 stream leads, and there's a wider group of a core of about 22 people that work with us to scrutinise this information. As I've mentioned previously, the general consensus was that the process was very, very messy. The customer wasn't getting updates. From a customer's point of view, they did not like it. They agreed the record keeping was poor. There was no record of this information anywhere, unless it was on an email someone had sent a long time ago. And contact was minimal with customers. So customers were constantly chasing up to our touchpoint team, asking for updates, and they were going off trying to get these updates. Nobody could give us updates on this. So as I say, to cut a very long story short, it was very, very messy at that time. And there was no way of finding out what work was required and when it would happen, and if it would happen, which contributed to customers' dissatisfaction. So the culmination and the realisation of a lot of this stuff we'd already come to before we got our maladministration come through from the Housing Ombudsman. This was back in July 2023. This was the first maladministration that had come through within my time with the company, and I've been with the company 2.5 years now, and I believe some time before that, I'm not sure we'd had one for quite a long time before that. The actual complaint that it relates to is from January 2023. However, this customer started making complaints to us and telling us they had issues with damp and mould way back in early 2021. So it was around February time, 2021. At that time, the customer had a leak coming through the bedroom ceiling, which was causing damp and mold issues within the property. And as they reported early, we'd gone and carried out surveys pretty soon after that, ascertained what work that needed to be done. There were some tiles that needed to be replaced on the roof of the property, and they were replaced back in September 2021. So already we're looking at quite some time from them initially reporting it to the repairs being carried out. Very soon after those tiles were replaced, a leak was reported again, and nothing was done with it. So it disappeared into the ether. And then nothing was done up until April 2022, when the customer had to report a leak into us again. So I'm sure you can all agree that was a very, very poor customer experience, which was identified by the Housing Ombudsman in their review of the case when it was reviewed in July 2023. The key findings really rubber stamp what we already knew. Visits and conversations weren't being documented. Work that was carried out wasn't shown on our customer record management system. And the customers literally done most of the donkey work and trying to keep us, telling us that these repairs weren't happening. So by the time this had come in July 2023, we'd already made the decision and we'd already made the change over to the way that it is now. So now our repairs, sorry if you bear with me 1 second, a couple of technical difficulties there. There was some learning from the case study, sorry, before I move on to the next slide. So there was quite a bit of learning. It took almost 2 years to resolve the customer's issues with the roof. Very, very poor customer experience. Record keeping, that was highlighted to us. I know that the Ombudsman is very big on record keeping and ensuring that records are accurate and up to date. We hadn't done that in this instance, which resulted in maladministration for us. Maintaining regular contact, that goes back to the record keeping. They all go hand in hand. And this all caused major delays due to the work being completed. Positive thing was we were given 4 weeks once this maladministration came in to fix these things. As it had all moved over to our repairs team, which I'm going to talk to you about on the next slide, it was very quick, the response to the work being done. Everybody involved acted very swiftly to get these things sorted. And it was a joint effort from repairs, from the complaints team to review the complaint, but everything was done within 4 weeks of the determination. Now, I'm sure you're all thinking like I was when all of this happened, as everybody was sat around that table at the time. How come we got it done within 4 weeks? When it took 2 years to resolve before that point. And that was because, again, a lot of these things weren't done. Nobody was able to keep pull together a timeline of events without having to go a long way through and delve into a lot of detail to get to the bottom of things, which again, if we're thinking about the customer being at the heart of everything that we're doing, which we do at 13, that is an incredibly, incredibly poor experience, which thankfully wasn't more serious and thankfully was dealt with swiftly once we had all the information that we needed in place. So we decided that in around sort of early 2023, it was time for change because all of that donkey work, it happened. We looked at it, the information that was coming through from the analysis that was taking place, it was all similar, it was consistent. The information wasn't there. It meant we were paying more out for complaints. It meant that the customer was receiving a very, very poor experience, and it meant that works were taking far, far longer than they should have. And we analysed this with our customers as well. So we decided as a company, not me specifically, but collectively as a company, our board and everybody involved decided that repairs would take over responsibility for all things damp and mould to make sure that customer journey could be tracked and monitored more closely, and ensuring that with repairs being a more responsive service and asset being more planned, it could be dealt with more swiftly on that basis. Obviously, this was a big move. To move an entire scheme of work over to a new department, it wasn't taken lightly, and because of all of the analysis, like I've just mentioned previously, that gave us a better understanding that this was being done for the right reasons as well, and to ensure consistency for our customers. So, ushering in this chance to overhaul our services and ensure our customers getting the best possible experience, this was of the utmost importance to us. So that was the main reason for doing this. Initially, when all of this started, our repairs team started by creating a matrix for the categorisation of the severity of damp and mould, as well as ensuring all tradespeople that were going out and assessing this, they were trained to identify damp and mould within the property and being able to report that to our scheduling team, to their managers, to ensure it was getting logged and it was getting tracked and being worked through. A little bit on the matrix. So it was a 1 to 4 scale, 1 being very moderate and light, 4 being severe, and the jobs were allocated based on the severity of those things as well. So those ones that weren't as severe, although they were important, they weren't dealt with as swiftly as those severe cases were as well. So moving a little bit more into the present day, there are a few more things that we have done. Well, there actually is quite a few different things that we've done since then. All of our work is captured and booked within our repairs management system now. That didn't happen previously. So anyone going into it, so for example, if I'm looking at a complaint, trying to understand what's happened from a damp and mould point of view, all of that work is categorised within our system as well. So it can all be assessed to make sure that we know what's going on and that we can inform the customer of what's going on. Once it's been done, once the work has been carried out for our customers, there is a follow-up contact which happens 2 months after that work has taken place to ensure that the customer is happy with what's gone on, to ensure that there is no other issues arisen as a result of the work that's been carried out from a damp and mould point of view. That means that we can keep more on top of things and stop them before they get to a complaint point of view as well. We've also added a flag out systems to make sure that anybody with an impairment, a disability, they get extra support when they're identifying damp and mould within their property. So we ensure that the relevant people go out to the property and they are able to analyse it in the correct level of detail that they need to. We've uploaded some self-help videos on our website as well. Those that have been on the 13's website, you might have already seen them. If not, I can provide a link after this. We've also organised pre-planned gutter cleans in some of our high rises and some of our more problematic areas where we've had issues with damp and mould previously, to ensure that we're trying to preempt it and make sure that customers don't have to make the complaint or don't have to contact us because the gutters have been cleaned out, which is we're helping the damp and mould in that sense. Refresher training has been carried out for all stakeholders to ensure that we're making sure everybody has the right level of training. So a couple of pieces that aren't on there, and moving on to the next slide, I'll show you a little bit more about that. We have created a damp and mould team specifically and included surveyors into our repairs and maintenance teams. So that whole department, their speciality is damp and mould. We've created additional resource within that department because given the numbers that we were facing, we needed to ensure that the demand was dealt with in a timely manner. Otherwise, we'd find ourselves in the same position we found ourselves in previously. So we've added electricians and decorators all into that team to ensure that it is a full process from beginning to end when they're dealing with the damp and mould. All surveyor appointments on the system, as well as any repairs work carried out, is all captured within our CRM. Any contractor work is also carried out on there as well. We've introduced a new damp and mould contractor framework, which came into place from March 2024. We've revised the damp and mould leaflet with timescales and 100% post inspections as well. So there's quite a bit that we've done. I won't labour the list too much because I'm sure you think there's a lot going on there. Obviously, these slides will be available after the session if anyone wants access to them. So talking a little bit about our damp and mould team. There's a specific damp and mould manager who is one of my peers and sits at my level. As well as that, they've got a team leader. They've got surveyors in there, planners, painters and decorators, coordinators. So what we've done is we've decided that given the numbers that were coming through, you know, obviously with the amount of properties that we have, 36,000, we need to ensure that we have enough resource to man everything. So that's the reason for them putting this team in place. And as you can see, there's a lot of different people within that team to make sure that the process and the experience from a customer's perspective is a very positive one, and everything is kept in one place to make sure everyone's aware of what's going on. So as we're very keen to learn, and we're very keen to improve the services that we're offering for our customers, hence the reason that I have my role within 13. This is constantly changing, and this is constantly evolving to make sure that we're giving the best service to our customers. We have a demand squad that we've introduced, as well as the damp and mould team, to deal with some of these issues before they become major and have to be dealt with specifically by our damp and mould team. We've introduced more surveyors into the team as well. From my point of view, I regularly meet with the head of repairs to understand what's going on from that repairs team, as well as sharing with them the information that comes through from complaints. That information is then disseminated to everybody within those teams. We also look at our new lets and our terminations to understand if there's any issues that have arisen with damp and mould under those headings, and that all feeds into our repairs teams, our voids teams. Everybody that has a stake in this knows what's going on with damp and mould from a 13 point of view. Quarterly, I meet with our member responsible for complaints, as well as our customer group, which I mentioned earlier, from a complaints point of view. So any particularly interesting cases or any case studies that come through from that, they take a keen interest in it and like to keep an eye on. So that'll be then reported into them on a regular basis as well, so they know exactly what's gone on. And we've also created a repairs focus group with those customers as well, with damp and mould high on the agenda. So as well as the complaints, we've created this specific repairs group with damp and mould, and they had a meeting yesterday, and it was a very interesting meeting. They talked a lot about damp and mould, and I can't wait to hear more about it, which I'm going to catch up with the team today to find out. As well as this, we've also added some pieces to our voicescape systems as well, which allows two-way communication with any customers that are experiencing damp and mould. It's in the testing phase at the moment, but the whole aim of this is to understand how customers want to interact and how we can improve the level of communication with our customers and keeping in touch with them regularly. And there's just another couple of bits that I want to mention on here. That, as I mentioned, we do 100% post inspections with our customers from a quality point of view. Those are carried out by a team leader. We were given an additional budget for our contractors to spend because of the volume of what was coming through. Some of that budget was given for back office, which you'll have seen from the damp and mould team that we put in place as well. On reflection, going back to where we started with this, we're reflecting on this again. Any advice that I mean, not necessarily just me, this isn't just my views, this is the views of collectively of 13. The advice will be to understand your areas, understand the data that you've got available at your fingertips. And looking at Rosie's, it looks like Rosie's company do understand the data they've got to work with, and Rosie does as well. Our work is comprised of 60% ventilation issues and 40% issues with the building. So we work with our contractors and all of the stakeholders in between to make sure that we're getting that right as well. Other advice, have a team that are dedicated to do these works. That way it keeps it in one place and it's easy to monitor and track and understand. Challenges, contractors, obviously we're all working from the same pot, and if we've got a contractor and they've got a bunch of other jobs that they're doing for other housing associations, I'll use the term that's been used to me, everyone's fishing out of the same pond. So we're all working with the same contractors trying to get the same work done, which can cause issues in itself. If you can, try and recruit internally. And the last thing for me is be open and honest about timescales. I'm sure none of us are naive enough to think that these things can be dealt with overnight. You know, it's took a long time to get to the point that we're at 13, and there's still a lot of work for us to do. Be open and honest with your customer about timescales. Even if you've got to put them in leaflets, paraphernalia, whatever it might be, just be clear and open and honest with them. And that is it for me. I've noticed this, the questions have started, hands have started, so I will hand over the questions now.
Thank you very much, Bobby. Thank you. That was absolutely brilliant. And I knew it was going to be good when you opened up with Oasis. So I thought, yeah, No, it was really good. Thank you very much. It was really interesting. Thank you for, I feel like you've really taken us on a journey actually from, 13 from a year ago to now to actually where you're going next. And loads of really interesting and good work being done. Particularly liked your, when you mentioned about the matrix that you use for the sort of categorization to sort of see how severe the damp and mould is and help you to prioritise that as well, which I thought was brilliant. And also when you mentioned some of the work that you've been doing and sort of creating those self-help videos, I really like that because I thought a lot of what we've been doing around our work when we've done our sort of spotlight report into damp and mould, and our follow-up report is about, finding our silence, and as Rosie mentioned as well, about finding the silence. And I think doing that, creating videos, helping to reach lots of different demographics as well. So thinking about, creating those videos, providing information in different formats to support those residents. So yeah, lots of really good and interesting examples there as well. So yeah. I do have some questions for you, but I can see that Juliet, you've had your hand up for a few minutes now. So I'll come over to you first, Juliet, and then I'll see if anyone else has some questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Bobby, for the presentation. I just wondered, you are running a complaints team.
Yes.
And you've got complaints officers, is that right?
That's right, Juliet, yeah.
And they will do investigations, do they?
That's right, yeah.
And so when a damp and mould one comes in, it goes to your complaints officers. They would do the investigation, respond to the customer. Who does your stage twos? Would that then go to your damp and mould specialist manager?
No, that would be either me or the team leader who do the stage twos. However, that is done in conjunction. So we would carry out the stage 2 investigation. What would then happen, and this happens right across the board, Julia, so this isn't just for damp and mould ones specifically. Yes, okay. There will be those responses will be signed off by heads of service and service directors. So that keeps everything sort of clean, so that if there is a particular tricky case from a damp and mould point of view, then the head of the repairs team, as well as the service director of that team, they all know about it, and it will be brought up in conversation. So if there's anything that we need to do from the back of it, they are aware of that, and they will be able to help us ensure that that work gets completed.
Right, but you've got a team leader and then yourself.
Yes.
Involved in the specialist areas for the stage 2s.
Yeah. So one of the benefits of mine and that team leader's role are we get to see quite a lot of what goes on right across the business, probably more so than most other managers or team leaders within 13. So we've built up really good relationships with these people already, which has been absolutely vital in getting answers and getting responses to a lot of this stuff. Because of the relationship that we have with these people, obviously they would know about that before it's gone to stage 2 anyway, because we would have worked with them at stage 1 from a coordinator's point of view, and then it's a case of sort of reviewing that at stage 2 from our investigation. So because we've built those relationships up, it's really helped us not necessarily have to be as sort of in their faces from that damp and mould team, because we already know what's going on, and they do as well.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Juliet and Bobby. I have a question for you, actually, Bobby. So just thinking back to your presentation, how often do you mentioned about how your customer ambassadors sort of follow up with residents who've had damp and mould repairs. How often do they do that? Sort of, is it on and how do they sort of keep that communication going?
So what they would do is 2 months after, so for instance, if there was a piece of damp and mould remedial work that had been carried out, Anthea, they would contact the customer after the work had been done and make sure everything was okay. But then 2 months after that, they would then contact the customer again. If everything was all right at that point, that would be the end of it. So they wouldn't sort of keep chasing the customer at that point. But if it wasn't, they would then start to work with the customer and arrange the appointments again after that. So it would be 2 months, and depending on how that conversation goes, that would depend whether there's extra sort of communication needs to be put in place.
That's brilliant, thank you. So they don't kind of just leave it there. It's having that follow-up, keeping that communication going, and seeing what else needs to be done, if anything. No, that's really good. Thank you. And the other question I have for you is, were you given a budget to make all of these sort of changes around damp and mould? And if not, how did you sort of fund the new sort of damp and mould department to make sure it didn't impact on other areas of the business? And were there any kind of challenges or barriers in doing that?
So in terms of figures, I might have to hand over to Adele for this one, but yes, there was an additional budget put onto it, Anthea, because we realised as a business very early doors how important this was to get this right, and the ramifications of not getting it right. An additional resource was put to it in terms of an additional budget, and this is where I'm going to hand over to Adele because I can't remember the number off the top of my head.
Yeah, we did. Bobby talked you through the asset model, and it's soon become apparent that the raw data that they were collecting, and it was very disjointed to the rest of the business. So we decided to actually move some of the surveyors and some of the colleagues from the asset over to repairs, but also expand the team, because like for everybody here, damp and mould's huge. And we were given a big budget to sort it out. And we don't all have open checkbooks. So I think we were given about 4.5 million. But within that, we've also, which Bobby talked you through, created that new demand group of 30 odd multi-skilled tradesmen as well, because not only are we trying to tackling the damp and mould, and I'm sure you're all exactly the same, we're also tackling the repairs demand that's constantly coming through, and it's still there. We're still trying to catch up since COVID. So for us, we sat and we looked and we produced a strategy around what's our next 5-year vision, where are we going to go, what do we need to do to tackle this. We brought our involved customers on board, like Bobby's been telling you, and then we sat and we thought, right, we need a demand squad, because we wanted to deal with the damp and mould in a more efficient, effective way, while still clearing the backlog of the repairs, which is why we hit it from a two-pronged approach. And I have to say today, fingers crossed, it is working really, really well. We've worked really, really closely in terms of that and the budget, but we are under a lot of pressure to make sure with it we improve our services for our customers, because like Bobby said, it's really important we get this right. And when it doesn't go right, there's a huge focus this year, 2024, on us learning through, where we're getting things wrong, how can we put it right, and actually giving people at the front line the autonomy to put it right quickly, so it doesn't have to go through a load of red tape.
And that's brilliant. Thank you both very much. I think it's that's really important what you said. It's having that balance, isn't it, of trying to tackle the damp and mould, but then also the other areas like the repairs, making sure that those sort of service areas don't kind of fall back as a result. So yeah, and interesting as well, talking about kind of having that look ahead and planning ahead. Okay, well, what would we do in 5 years? And I expect it's great to hear that you're working so closely with your member responsible for complaints as well, Bobby, sort of on that quarterly basis to help keep that kind of that board level kind of buy-in and and that overview of complaints. So yeah, really good. Thank you both. I can see Juliet, you've got your hand up, and then I'll come to you, Rosie.
Sorry, Bobby, me again.
All right.
Sorry if they were on the slides, I must have missed them, but I put you on the spot now, figures wise. How many complaints do you get a year, and then how many would you say are related to damp and mould?
They're not on the slides, Juliet.
Right.
This is all right, but I know the information anyway. So we get the last year that's just finished at the back end of March. We had just over 1,600 complaints. If you compare that to 2023, it was about half that, or just over half that. I think we had about 900 in total by the end of it. In terms of damp and mould, I would say approximately 20 to 40% of those complaints. I know that's quite a big thing, because some of them will cover sort of different areas as well in that. I would say quite a lot of them this year have covered damp and mould. 20 to 40%, I would probably say.
What's your stock? Sorry, Bobby. I know you mentioned that.
Sorry, what was that?
Your stock number. Sorry, how many has it?
Just over 36,000.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Rosie, did you have a question?
I did, and then I was just really interested by that question, and I'd completely forgotten what my question was going to be. So
Don't worry if you can't remember.
I'll probably remember it in a second.
No, that's absolutely fine. And if anybody does have any questions afterwards, if you sort of have a think afterwards, you can always sort of get in touch with us as well. I can see Bobby nodding there, is happy
Please
to.
do.
Thank you. Are there any other questions before we sort of close the session? Rosie,
Rosie's
is it come back to you?
Yeah.
That's always the way, isn't it?
Yeah, it was just, I don't know if you're involved in the actual recruitment of this side, but do you have any tips for anyone on how to get engaged tenants, for tenant feedback, for focus groups, anything like that? Because it's something we've been struggling with for a really long time.
That is something we can talk about after this if you want, Rosie, because yes, I do have some tips on that, and Adele will as well. So if you want to, I'll make contact after this, and then we can arrange something if you'd like. Specifically with damp and mould, it was a topic on everybody's lips. So a lot of our customers are very interested in this stuff anyway, because some of them have got first-hand experience of this, much like you've had in the past. So getting their buy-in with some of this stuff is a little bit easier in that respect. But there's a whole piece of work that we're doing to try and recruit more customers for not only this, younger people and people in our care and support schemes as well. So I'll make contact after this with you, and we'll sort something out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Thank you, Bobby. If there are no further questions, firstly, it's just a huge thank you again to Rosie and to Bobby as well for your presentations. Absolutely fantastic. Really, really enjoyed both of those. Really interesting. And I can see as well we've had lots of questions and lots of rounds of applause. And so yes, thank you both very much for being our guinea pigs as well for the first one of the year too. So really appreciate your time this morning. And thank you all to everybody as well for attending today. Really appreciate your time and all of your questions too. I'm just going to put a link into the chat now for an evaluation form. If you wouldn't mind completing it, really appreciate your feedback. It's just so going forward, we can try and put more sessions on like this. Today we've tried to vary it, so you've heard from sort of a larger landlord in the north, a smaller landlord in the south, and we'll keep to try to do that so you can kind of hear from lots of different member landlords. But we'd love to hear from you. I can see actually we've got a hand up. Adele, did you have another question?
Yeah, just a quick one, Anthea. And I might have missed it. Sorry if I have. What's the frequency of these meetings? And do we as a group set the agenda, set what we'd like to know, or how does that work?
Thanks, Adele. No, that's a really good question. So the frequency at the moment is we're going to try and put on an event sort of roughly every month. It may not always be a landlord forum, but it might be something like a severe maladministration webinar, perhaps learning from a special investigation. We might put out some webinars after if we release an insight report. So the idea is we want to keep this a regular kind of forum, a regular group meeting, and making it available on the Centre for Learning. So anybody that kind of any one of our member landlords can sign up to the Learning Hub and see what's on. And so today we've sort of had that focus on damp and mould, but what we'd like to do going forward is change that up and have a different focus for each session. So if on the evaluation form, if you do have any suggestions for what you'd like to hear more about, please do put it on there, because we're this one was our first one, but we're definitely up to looking for different topics. If there's anything you particularly like to hear about, if there's anything you're finding challenging, or if there's anything that you're doing, or if other member landlords are doing that you think, oh, actually, after coming on here, I'd really, I think this might be something we can share. Please do get in touch with us. Don't wait for us to come to you. We'd be really, really pleased to hear from you as well. So what we'll do, we'll keep this, we'll keep kind of communications open. We'll put things on our social media, and make sure you check out our newsletter as well, because we always try and put what the next kind of events coming up in our newsletter. But yeah, on LinkedIn and things like that as well, we'll always be advertising. But as generally, we're trying to put something on for you every month or so, if we can. So, but
thanks, Anthea.
So brilliant, no problem. And just thank you all very much again. It's been really, really great to have you all here. So thank you. And we'll pop this with the slides on the website shortly, so that will be available to everybody.
Thanks, Anthea.
Yeah. But have a nice rest of the day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.